Hello, listeners. Today we have Catherine Derieux. She was a research intern at Animal Charity Evaluators. She was board member of our very own EA Sweden. And now she's People Operations Officer at GFI Europe. And she'll tell you all about alternative proteins and, more importantly, why you should work in that space. So let's give a warm round of applause for Catherine.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Really glad to see you all here. So yeah, let's talk about alternative proteins and career opportunities. So to start with, I'll kind of give a brief introduction to alternative proteins, what they are, and why we at the Good Food Institute think that they're so powerful and have so much potential. That will lead me into GFI's theory of change. So I'll briefly talk about what we do, who we are, and then dive into what we are most interested in, which is career opportunities in the sector. And then I'll be sharing some useful resources as well. So let's get started. So first, kind of some definitions for those of you who might not be fully familiar with alternative proteins. So at GFI, we distinguish between three main categories, which are plant-based, cultivated, and fermentation-derived. Plant-based products aim to mimic the taste and texture of conventional animal products, but are using plants as their building blocks. So they're trying to replicate the experience of eating animal meat. Cultivated meat, on the other hand, is actual meat. It's real meat. On the cellular level, it's the same as conventional animal meat. The only difference is that instead of growing the cells in an animal, you're actually growing it in a cultivator. And then fermentation derived, you could describe it as using microbes in a kind of smart, cool, and innovative way to produce protein alternatives. So you can either use the microbes as themselves as a protein source. So that would be, for example, fungi or yeast, which is what corn is doing, for example. Or you could use the microbes to produce like an ingredient that you can then use in an end product. And the way I've described them just now is like in three very distinct categories, but in reality, in future, we expect kind of them to coexist kind of on a spectrum. So having, for example, like a plant-based burger who might be using cultivated fat, for example, because the animal fat is what really gives meat the taste and makes it really delicious. So why do we need alternative proteins? Well, the big question that is driving our work and which we're trying to find answers to is how are we going to feed the world when we reach 10 billion people by 2050? And in short, we just cannot simply scale the systems that we have currently. So we need to find other ways. We know that conventional animal agriculture is a significant contributor to some of the world's biggest problems. So producing about 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So animal agriculture is a big driver in terms of climate change, but it's also contributing to environmental degradation, so that either from deforestation or water pollution. It also has an impact on global food security. Again, like it's really an inefficient system. You need 9 calories of feed to get 1 calorie out of protein from a chicken, for example, which is supposed to be the most effective animal that we breed for food. So again, a very inefficient system. And then in terms of antibiotic resistance and zoonotic disease risk, just animal farms are the perfect breeding ground for the future pandemics. And finally, as we probably all know in this room, this is also causing a lot of animal suffering. So none of this is news. We've known this for years. It's been in the media for years, especially the environmental effect. And even though this is true, we still see that global meat consumption is going up and up and up. And we expect this trend to continue going in this direction until 2050. So why is that? Why is it that even people know about the detrimental effects of meat consumption, they still choose to buy that for what they're going to eat 3 times a day. Well, looking at the consumer research at GFI, we've noticed that there are 3 main drivers of what people the criteria that people use in deciding what they're going to purchase. So that's taste, price, and convenience. And basically, you need all those 3 to be favorable and met for people to be more happy to consider other factors, such as the environmental impact or the animal welfare. So that means that only a very small portion of the population will only make the sustainable choice a small portion of the time. So that leads me to kind of GFI's theory of change. Basically, make something that people want. We want to, instead of asking consumers to give up the meat that they love, we want to help develop alternatives that are as tasty and delicious, as affordable, and as accessible as the product that people buy now. So GFI, we are an international nonprofit helping to build a more sustainable, safe, and just food system by transforming how we produce meat. We started in the US in 2016, and we've then expanded into other areas of the globe. So at the moment, we have affiliates in Brazil, in Europe, in India, Israel, and Asia Pacific. And so we work with scientists, businesses, and policymakers to really accelerate the whole alternative protein sector and want to make those products accessible in the fastest, most efficient way possible. So in recent years, we've seen a lot of progress in the sector, a lot of interest as well. More products and better products have come and reached the market shelves. So that's really exciting. But we still see a lot of ample white space that needs to be addressed. There's a lot of untapped potential, and so plenty of opportunities for people to find a successful career in the sector. So why might you want to consider a career in alternative proteins? Well, as I said, there are a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of things that can be done. And there are a lot of enablers at the moment that will kind of support people who want to transition into that field. We're expecting more funding to come into the space. It's also a great opportunity to be a leader in your field and be at the cutting edge of innovation. And then finally, and one thing that we probably all care about in this community is the impact that we might have. So why do we think it's particularly interesting in the Nordic countries? So first of all, there are high amounts of funding that are available in the Nordic countries. So as an example, the Danish government, I think it was in October 2021, allocated huge amounts of funding to plant-based foods. It was 1 billion kroner, so which was about 168 million euros. So that's the single largest amount of funding globally that went for plant-based foods. At GFI, we also conducted a research project kind of looking at R&D funding opportunities in Europe. And Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland, all 4 came in the top 10 countries that we identify with like the most opportunities for R&D funding. There's also strong research happening in this field. We have at GF, like we're supporting 2 student groups in Norwegian universities, for example, via the Alternative Protein Project. And then finally, in terms of policy, we think there's a lot of impact that could be had in those countries. Like there's like very good conditions for the Nordic countries to become champions for alternative protein, both in their local context, but also at the EU level. So, looking at some potential careers that you could pursue. The main gap at the moment, both in academia and in the industry, is the science and technology side of things. So people with this scientific and technical background are in really, really high demand at the moment, but there's also a lot of different other things that you could be doing. In academia, so obviously research is a big one. but also kind of teaching the future workforce that will come to work in this sector. I've seen in a recent article that we're expecting kind of 8 million jobs in the alternative protein sector by 2040. So obviously, all this workforce needs to be trained. Regarding the industry, there's also a lot of things you could be doing. So you could work for a startup or start your own startups. But something that's probably more neglected is also considering working for a more established company where you could build some influence and kind of really push the alternative protein agenda forward. Another thing is also quite neglected is working for investment funds. So that would be less directly related, but basically if you're able to channel funding into the alternative protein space, you could have a lot of impact there. So basically what I mean by investment fund is that startups in the earlier stage usually get funding from venture capital. But as they scale and as they reach later stages in their development, they need other sort of funding. So that could be from banks, pension funds, things like that, that will give those companies loans. Looking at the policy sector, there's a lot that governments need to be doing that they are not at the moment. So that's in terms of regulation, labeling, again, investing R&D funding into the sector, and just in general, creating an enabling environment for alternative protein to thrive. So going into that sector, you could consider working in the civil service. Usually, there's quite a clear path in that sector. So that will vary depending on the country you're based in. If you want to work for the European Commission, then you would need to do a Blue Book traineeship. There's an EA forum post about that if you want to look more into it. You could also consider working for a political party. That's also kind of a really neglected area with a lot of potential impact. Basically, if you're the first person joining a party who really cares about alternative protein or those kind of niche subjects, you could have a lot of influence by really shaping the program of that party on those specific subjects. You could work for a public affairs consultancy. Again, there's also usually like a very kind of structured progression path in those. It's usually a good way to build career capital and kind of learn about lobbying. And so once you've built that career capital, you could consider taking a public affairs role in a company. At the moment, they're still really rare, and you would need like experience to be able to land those jobs. One thing to consider about policy work is that, first of all, it really helps if you like politics, which not everybody does. And the other thing is that it can take a very long time before you actually see improvement and see change happening. So you need to be comfortable with that. So again, like it's an area which is quite neglected, where you could have a lot of impact, but it also needs to be a good fit. And then finally, looking at the non-profit sector, so you could work for an NGO or a think tank. And in there, like, there's a lot of different roles that you could take. So at GFI, we have role related to those three areas. So kind of people with a scientific background, people with a policy background, and people with industry backgrounds. But there are also a lot of supportive role that you could take. So that can be in communications, in operations, in philanthropy. And those are all kind of transferable skills. So if you work for an AP organization, or like kind of related, so in animal welfare, in environment, all those skills that you can transfer to other organizations as well. So you kind of have a lot of career capital in a way, and you could decide to transition to another sector. Kind of same applies to industry as well. Like every company at some point will need someone to run their payroll, do their finances, kind of do marketing and sales and all of that. So kind of the key idea there is that there is, at the moment, potential for anyone with any background to have some sort of contribution to the sector. And to kind of illustrate that, I wanted to give some kind of a mini case study of the the operations team at GFI Europe. So at the moment, we are 4 people in the team. And apart from our head of operations, all 3 of us started as operations specialists, which is quite a like generalist and general in operations. So my colleague Iman She, before joining GFI, worked as a software engineer. And she wanted more kind of human contact in her day-to-day work, and she was interested in seeing kind of what it was to work for a high-impact charity. So she applied at GFI, and she brought a set of skills that we didn't even know that we needed. So today she's using her coding skills to kind of bring our digital systems to the next level. And being a remote-first organization, that's incredibly useful and impactful. She's able to automate some of like manual tasks that we were doing before and kind of freeing up time from colleagues to focus on where they can really bring value. Oshin, he has a background in European affairs in Brussels, so he did the Blue Book traineeship that I mentioned before. He worked for a public affairs consultancy as well, so he was really on the policy path, but he was following, like he had been following GFI for a while and was really excited about the mission. And so he applied and really now enjoys kind of the day-to-day problem solving and really seeing the impact that he has on the day-to-day. And is now transitioning to kind of specializing in project coordination and making sure that, again, like we're running an organization in a top-notch way. As for myself, I've been a freelancer for many years before joining GFI, working in the publishing and travel industries as a writer, editor, and translator. So nothing to do with operations. But I moved to Sweden in 2016 and kind of realized that French-speaking skills were not the most searched kind of skills in that context. So I kind of had to reevaluate and see what else I could offer the world. So that's how I came to operations, kind of seeing patterns in the thing I have been doing before and kind of the volunteer experience I had. And so I leveraged that and transitioned into operations, now specializing more on the people side of things, so doing a lot of recruitment and ensuring that we have like an excellent culture and that people are happy working for the organization. And I haven't looked back since. So again, kind of this mini case studies again was to really show that like we all had very different backgrounds and still landed in the similar role in operations. And from there, from this generalist kind of position, we're able to carve out a little niche for ourselves depending on the strengths and the thing we were most interested in. So I hope that that is an example that, again, anyone with any kind of background could find a way to contribute to the alternative protein space. So looking at some resources, everything I mentioned is available in a document that you can either access via this link or through this QR code if you want to scan it. So things you could do to get started if you're interested to join the alternative protein space. Well, first, if you're new to the sector, kind of educate yourself about alternative proteins. So you could look into, well, a good starting point obviously is GFI's website. You can find a lot of information there, and most of the resources that I listed here are from GFI. I think that's one of the main way that we contribute, is making a lot of useful resources that are open access and can help elevate the whole sector. We also have a MOOC, so that's a massive open online course, which is entirely online, entirely safe-paced. If you want something that has a little bit more accountability built into it, you could look at the Alternative Protein Fundamentals program. That's an 8 weeks program where every week you also get to meet with people in your cohorts. So that's great for networking as well. Next, just like get some ideas of what you can do and get inspired, get advice. So again, in the list of resources that you can find at this link, there is like a series of interviews that we conducted with people in the sector, how they got there. So that can give you some inspiration about what's possible, what kind of background people had before they joined the space. You could also look at animal advocacy careers skill profiles. There is one typically about alternative proteins, but there's also some one about policy work, about fundraising. So kind of you can see how you can also apply that to the sector. My colleagues in the US do regularly kind of Q&As calls that you can join and ask any question you have about careers in the sector and at GFI in particular. And then you can also apply for one of the 80,000 hours career calls. Then build a community, find your people. So you could sign up to join the GF Ideas community, which is bringing together students, scientists, people from the industry, all kind of path from the sector. We also have a collaborative research directory, which is like for researcher if you want to kind of work with another researcher on a specific project, for example, or see like which labs, who are the people working in the space who are excited about it. And then finally start getting some experience. A great way to do that if you're still a student is to launch a student group in your university. With GFI, like we do support some of those groups. So that's the Alternative Protein Project. As I mentioned, we have 2 in Norway, but there's still like plenty of opportunities to create a group either in the Nordics or in other countries. And you can also start looking at internships. So there is the Internship Opportunity Board as well. So kind of highlighting also other key resources that could be useful. We have a student guide with plenty of links, plenty of information, either if you're a student or also just like new to the sector. We have a startup manual if you want to launch your own company. And there's an alternative protein solution database where you can sign up, and that's basically a place where companies will go look who are all the smart and cool people who want to join the space, and so they might reach out and talk about the roles that they have. And finally, we have a jobbers as well. Oh yeah, there's the alternative protein solution database. So that's a database kind of listing all the white spaces, all the questions that need to be answered. So if you want to launch a project within the sector, you can go look there and see what we at GFI think are going to be the things that are the most impactful in kind of elevating the whole sector. Okay, so very briefly, one other thing that you can do, and a very simple thing that you can do, apart from dedicating your career, is just to make a donation. At GFI, we're 100% powered by philanthropy, and basically all the work that we're doing, we're only able to do it thanks to the generosity of our donors. All right, so starting to wrap up. I'm hoping this was kind of concrete and helpful, but if you're interested in working in the space to make it like super actionable, I would kind of encourage you to pick one resource from the list that's linked here and kind of commit to look into it. Like, there's a lot that's available, and it can be a bit overwhelming. So just like pick one thing, look into it, and then move to the next one. Second thing, oh yeah, there's some numbering issues on that PowerPoint. Next thing is to decide like on one concrete action that you can do today. So that can be finding someone in the sector that has a job that you find interesting and kind of reaching out to them, see if you can ask some questions. That can be as simple as signing up for a newsletter and get information and like keep up to date with what's happening in the sector. Or signing up for the course if you want to kind of educate yourself about alternative proteins. And then finally, just like, come speak to me. I'm going to be here tomorrow all day. Happy to have a chat and answer any question that you might have. Right after this, we have office hour in the workshop room number 1. So you're also welcome to join that. And that's it from me today. Thank you.